Moderating our next panel, Artists, Stars, and Transforming American Culture to Heal Our Nation's Racial and Economic Divide, is Maria Cardona, a political contributor for CNN and CNN in Espanol, founder of Latinovations, and principal of Dewey Square Group. Take it away, Maria.
Buenas tardes. Soy Maria Cardona, and I am thrilled to be able to bring you this panel and an important discussion about artists, stars, and transforming American culture to heal our nation's racial and economic divide. I am so thrilled to be able to present some amazing panelists to have this important discussion. We have here today with us Alan Curtis, President and CEO of the Eisenhower Foundation, Leila McDowell, Vice President of the Eisenhower Foundation, but also a journalist and an on-air talent at iHeartRadio, April Hernandez Castillo, actress, and Dolores Huerta of the Dolores Huerta Foundation, and of course, an iconic Latina activist. And this is a really important discussion because this is something that is so front and center, but that has actually been happening for decades. Over 50 years ago, the Kner Commission was convened by President Lyndon Johnson after protests and rebellions in over 150 cities in the 1960s. The commission concluded that the cause of the disorders was white racism. In the words of the commission, it is time to make good the promises of American democracy to all citizens, urban and rural, white and Black, Latino, American Indian, and every minority group. Well, America has still not made good on the promise of democracy, and in many ways, we have gone backwards when it comes to racial injustice, economic inequality, and poverty. Over those 50 years, we have assembled considerable evidence on what works. Yet we have not implemented all of those policies because we still don't have what the Kner Commission called new will from the American people. How can celebrities and social media influencers use their growing power to help create that new will to implement the change we need to heal our nation? And how can we push our leaders to do what is right, to do what is correct, even in the face of political pressures to do the opposite? I'm so excited to join this conversation and to start it up. So I'm going to turn it over to Alan Curtis, who has a presentation for us that will really help foment this discussion. Alan, over to you.
Maria, thank you. That was such a good summary. I'm not sure if I even should make a presentation, but I appreciate your words. I want to thank Cindy and LULAC for this opportunity for participating and partnering with the Eisenhower Foundation over the years. Way back over the years, in the mid-60s, as Maria said, our nation experienced disturbances in Los Angeles, Detroit, Newark, Washington, and over 150 other cities. Whites tended to call the disturbances riots. People of color called them protests. For the most part, the same differences in framing hold true today. In response to the 60s protests, President Johnson formed the Kner Commission, named after the governor of Illinois, Idle Kner at the time. Most of the members of the commission were privileged white men who bore the imprimatur of the political establishment. Yet a majority of the Kner commissioners concluded, as Maria said, that the underlying cause of the protest was white racism. And to repeat that now iconic policy recommendation, the Kner Commission said it is time to make good the promises of American democracy to all citizens, urban and rural, white and Black, Spanish surname, American Indian, and every minority group. That's what these guys said way back in the 60s. Dr. Martin Luther King and Senator Robert Kennedy both endorsed the Kner Commission report shortly before they were assassinated in that terrible year of 1968. Senator Kennedy had underscored Kner priorities as he campaigned for president in California with Cesar Chavez and Dolores Barca. The Eisenhower Foundation recently released our 50-year update of the Kner Commission, which is titled Healing Our Divided Society. We concluded that America has made relatively little progress in reducing racial injustice, inequality, inequity, and poverty. And in many ways, we've really gone backwards. For example, the Kner Commission, since the Kner Commission, deep poverty, income inequality, wealth inequality, public school segregation, and mass incarceration of people of color have increased. White nationalist movements have strengthened. The pandemic has made things disproportionately worse for people of color and the truly disadvantaged. Some Americans are aware of these negative trends, but so many Americans, we have found, are not aware or are in denial or just don't care. Nonetheless, over the last 50 years, the nation has built up considerable evidence on economic, civil rights, criminal justice, education, youth development, housing, and voting rights policies that do in fact work. Keynesian living wage investments in average citizen and the poor work. The Affordable Health Care Act works. Head Start and equity in public school finance work. Community-based crime prevention by indigenous nonprofit organizations assisted by carefully trained police work. Housing mobility models work and can lead to school integration. There is great potential in de-siloed, place-based, and evidence-based co-targeting of what works in truly disadvantaged neighborhoods. Yet, as we have spoken in cities around America, we have found that the public does not, for the most part, understand that we know a lot about what works and that policy needs to be based on evidence and science, not on dogma and supposition. So we need to redouble advocacy on what works in practical, common sense ways. We also have learned a great deal about what doesn't work, like willful indifference to the unequal distribution of prosperity. Most of all, what doesn't work includes not false 1980s rhetoric on government being the problem. The federal government was, in fact, the problem during the 1980s. In that decade, inequality rose sharply. Wages for average Americans stagnated. Labor union power was further reduced. Poverty increased. Homelessness increased. Mass incarceration of people of color rose dramatically. Regulation was weakened, and giant corporations began to monopolize industry after industry. Now, with the pandemic having made everything disproportionately worse for people of color and impoverished Americans, we need to continue advocating for a more activist public sector that recognizes healing and Kner priorities. It is time to seize the day, renegotiate the social contract, restructure basic power equations, and change the rules of the game. The goal is not to get back to normal. Normal has been the problem in America. Importantly, America has in fact already reversed that false 1980s rhetoric on diminishing the role of federal government. 2020 hosted the largest expansion of federal financial activity in American history, and we are continuing in 2021. In order to seize the day, to scale up what works, and to scale down what doesn't work, we need what the 1968 Kner Commission called new will, as Maria said, from the American people. But how can we create new public will in our divided society? That is one of the most important questions of our time. The creation of new political will in America depends in no small part on intensified advocacy for voter rights. The 2020 census has documented that Hispanics now make up almost 19% of the population. As the Hispanic population continues to grow in its voting power, it is such a significant force in the creation of new will. The potential is so great. And therefore, in many ways, as we approach the 2022 and 2024 elections, LULAC can perhaps best embrace Kner and healing priorities by advocating for voter rights, by reform over the attempts at the state level at voter suppression, and by getting people to the polls. Today, we want to suggest as well that new will to scale up what works and to heal our divided society can be created by the visual arts, the performing arts, and other cultural institutions. The Mellon Foundation and the Eisenhower Foundation are asking how the arts and the humanities can help change attitudes, change values, and change culture in America in ways that help generate new will. Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta, and Martin Luther King created cultural change in the 1960s, change that was amplified, visualized, and facilitated by music, by visual arts, and by advocacy through institutions like museums. The result was public sector legislation like the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and the Fair Housing Act of 1968. In turn, that legislation created more cultural change and still more legislation. So culture impacts policy, and policy impacts culture. To better tap the potential and power of this cause and effect process that can help create new will and heal our divided society, we are collaborating on events with visionaries in the arts and the humanities. For example, we are planning an event with Harvard professor Sarah Lewis on how photographic art can change culture and create new will. We are asking the directors of the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Museum of Modern Art in New York how they can better focus their prestigious international institutions on the people who will most benefit from the priorities of the Kner Commission. We are organizing events with grassroots nonprofit organizations like the Laundromat Project in Bed-Stuy and Expo Chicago, in which they will dialogue on how community building artworks that are collaborative and co-created through an anti-racist lens can more creatively further Kner and healing priorities. We are planning an event in Washington, D.C. on cultural change, new will, and the role of museums, something Maria will like, with the directors of the Smithsonian Latino, African American, and American Indian museums. We are planning an event with the Academy of American Poets in which young poets of color will talk about how they can make an impact, as did Amanda Gorman on Inauguration Day a few months back. In the performing arts, we are planning events with the Kennedy Center Vice President for Social Impact, with film producers and writers in Hollywood, with the Norman Lear Center for the Study of Entertainment Media, and with the Universal Hip Hop Museum. At the grassroots, Bishop William Barber and his colleagues on the Poor People's Campaign are leading a panel on Kner, healing, and the use of performing arts to create change. In addition to a panel discussion, illustrative performances by grassroots artists supportive of the Poor People's Campaign are being recorded and presented. The performances and presentations will reflect the diversity of Bishop Barber's moral fusion movement, from grassroots born of the coal miners' angst in Appalachia to gospel reflecting the tradition of struggle in Southern African American churches. With these examples of some of our upcoming events in mind, I wish to challenge LULAC and our panelists today to push the envelope for how Latinos can lead in using your rich history in the arts and the humanities to create new will to reduce racial injustice, inequality, and poverty. In the performing arts, one place where LULAC might want to begin is with Lin Manuel Miranda, who already has shown how he can create powerful, positive change. He brilliantly integrates entertainment, politics, and history. And I am also partial to him because our Generation Z daughter's first name is Miranda. In the visual arts, one place LULAC might want to begin is with the new Latinx Artist Fellowship Initiative funded by the Mellon Foundation and the Ford Foundation. The program is celebrating the plurality and diversity of Latinx artists while aiming to secure their place in American culture. We challenge LULAC as well to explore how the arts and the humanities can and should impact different audiences. Should we mainly try to inspire and energize believers in Kner and healing priorities so they are motivated to continue the struggle? Should we focus on persuading persons who presently are uncertain, are sitting on the fence, or are independent? Or should we seek to convert, say, white working class men who may be opposed to Kner priorities, as well as state legislators who are restricting voters' rights? Moving forward, we are honored then to reinforce positive cultural and institutional change with LULAC. We are honored to remind the American public with you of how long the dream has been deferred. And we are dedicated with you to Dolores Huerta when she taught us to say, yes, we can.
Thank you so much, Alan. That was an incredibly compelling presentation, and there's so much in there that I think we all not just can agree with, but can certainly get behind and will help spur this discussion. And I'll start by saying that I have been involved in the creation of the American Museum of the National Museum of the American Latino. I've been on the board of the Friends group that has been supporting legislation and trying to do some fundraising around that. And I remember the report from the commission that came out that started the effort to have this museum created was called Willful Ignorance. And so, as you remember, it is exactly around the same themes of the Kner Commission, right? And the message from everyone who was behind the commission and everyone who has been a part of trying to lift up the importance of having a museum on our national mall about the history, the rich history of Latinos, and everyone on this call or on this Zoom has been involved in some way, shape, or form, is because if we are absent from our nation's history, if we are absent from our nation's images, it is all that much easier to vilify us, to stereotype us, to victimize us, and ultimately to use us as scapegoats for whatever problem du jour this country is going through. And we have seen that that was the case in these past 4 years. And so I love what you're saying about how we all need to be a part of pushing this, and how you're challenging LULAC and all of us to make sure that we keep that message front and center. So with that in mind, I do want to start the discussion with our panelists to essentially talk about exactly that. So let me go to April as the actress on the panel. How can celebrities really use their influence and their pull, if you will, to make sure that we are talking about the nation's most important issues front and center? Sometimes celebrities don't want to get involved in those types of arguments. So what is your message to these influencers who have that platform?
When it comes to celebrities and voicing their opinion, I think we've seen many celebrities speak up in ways that they didn't dare do maybe even 5 years ago, which is profound, because I think we've seen movements like Time's Up, Me Too, because you have these celebrities finally not being afraid any longer to say what they've seen, what bothers them, or even basketball players now, right? Getting involved in saying we need to talk about racial topics. Like we can't keep accepting this. When it comes though to celebrities also using their voice, I think because we live in this cancel culture, that some of us may pull back from really voicing our opinions because corporations are involved. And so if you say something, then that means that you're affecting somebody's business, their money. So it's like this 50-50. I think it's a personal choice of saying, you know what, this is my platform, I want to use it. And I am never bothered by someone who just chooses to say, I want to just remain an actor and I'd rather use my art to speak for me. And I think that's also allowing them, that many people are afraid to accept that role of being a role model and speaking up. But I think what a profound time to speak up with everything that's going on. Even the moment that you become or go on social media, you are a public figure. And what you say matters, and your words, oh my goodness, we see it now more than ever. The words that you speak, and we are so influential. So I applaud those that do speak up, and I'm not mad for those who just choose to say it's just too much because of this cancel culture. I'm afraid to say what I really want to, especially when, you know, the political tensions were very high these last 4 years, wink, wink, if you know what I'm talking about. It was one of those of like, well, if I do say something I believe, then everyone is going to misconstrue what I say.
Right.
You know, so it's showing grace for those who say and don't say.
And Dolores, I want to go to you now. How can celebrities use their platforms to amplify marginalized voices and create new will in our nation the way that the Kner Commission had imagined it so many years ago?
Oh, hi, I'm Dolores Huerta. I'm so happy to be with you here at this LULAC conference. Well, we know that celebrities have a big voice. They have a lot of followers, and people really pay attention to what they say. And of course, they always try to imitate celebrities. So I think it's very important for celebrities to make that part of their mission, part of their work, that they have to stand up for the progressive issues that are affecting our community.
Lila, let me go to you with a similar question, but focused on an influencer. As a journalist and as an on-air talent for iHeartRadio, you speak to a lot of people and you hear their stories. How can influencers, what impact can they have on social impact organizations and the movements that are created by all of the issues that we are seeing that are front and center in our country?
Well, I think we're seeing that happen in some very dramatic ways. And of course, historically, there have always been courageous actors and writers who have spoken out. I mean, that's why we had the blacklists in Hollywood, where people who were considered progressive or quote unquote communist were blacklisted from Hollywood, or a Paul Robeson who had his passport taken away because he spoke out against injustice. So there's a long tradition, I think, of courageous people who work in the arts, humanities, and cultures, and our social influencers in that sense. Now we've got YouTube and digital who are doing that. And what's really interesting, we can see that now with reality TV. I had the pleasure of interviewing Amara La Negra, who is on Love and Hip Hop Miami. And she talked about how the new season of Love and Hip Hop Miami, which is getting ready to start, I think Monday, or just started this week. But at any rate, it's a lot more woke. It's dealing with issues of police brutality and immigrant rights and so on and so forth. So that's in it. Cardi B, you know, extremely popular. I mean, she's got millions and millions of followers. She dares to speak out politically and has some very profound and insightful things to say. And I think that that's very important as we talk about what Alan was saying in terms of creating new will, because it gives other people courage to say, if they can speak out, if they can stand up, maybe we can too. Maybe we will call our senator and push for that policy. We saw Love and Hip Hop at Atlanta in the forefront of some of the marches around police brutality down, with Breonna and others who have been victims of police brutality, putting themselves on the front line, not afraid to say, look, this is wrong. We're going to stand up against injustice, and we need to create a new paradigm for how police interact with people of color. And lastly, I'll say, a fellow radio personality, now he got in some trouble recently, but Tweety Bird, back in the day, he and many other Latino radio personalities were widely credited with the incredible turnouts with the immigrant rights marches and the marches for a comprehensive immigration policy in our country. And that did create a landscape that I believe helped lead to the DREAM Act that ultimately passed. So I think that as artists, as radio personalities, reporters too, I believe we have a responsibility as human beings to try to change this world for the better. And obviously the Kner Commission laid out a lot of those policies on how to redress racial and economic inequality and poverty and injustice. I believe that we all as human beings who breathe this air have a responsibility to pay the rent of activism in whatever way we can to live here. So that's just my personal feeling.
That's a really, really good point. And it can be very personal. And April, I want to go back to you because you made the point that you admire and you yourself have used your platform to push these issues of social justice, racial inequality, poverty, essentially all of the issues that the Kner Commission has said are part of pushing this new will for the American public. So at what point do you think it becomes a responsibility for celebrities to do that, even if they are, and you talked about this, even if they are uncomfortable because they might experience some pushback or because of that cancel culture? Are we at the point where, as Leila mentioned, it should be a responsibility for people who do have that kind of platform?
No, I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's fair to put that on anyone.
Sure.
Because just because I have a platform does not mean that I'm passionate about everything else that you may be passionate about.
Right.
So I can't force my passions on someone. If I'm passionate about planting a whole bunch of trees in the Bronx in New York City, because I want to see more of a green, earth on one of the best boroughs, I'm just gonna say, because I'm a little biased, and if someone else is not passionate, I don't want to force that on them. Right. But I do believe that if you are passionate about something, that if you have experienced, some kind of racial injustice, or you have been a victim of intimate partner violence, and you have that platform, then absolutely there should be a point where you do speak up. And even if even if you need a little help, even if you need to be educated. I'm a victim. I'm a survivor of intimate partner violence, and it took me over 10 years to speak about my story. But before I even did that, I made sure that I educated myself, because I wanted to understand, how did I fall into that kind of situation? How did I almost lose my life to someone whom I loved? Also, had bouts of suicidal ideations. How did I fall into that? And it was understanding that it was generational. So for some of us, it goes deeper. And I think that there just needs to be more support when someone finally does speak up. But no, I don't think anyone who gets on a platform should have to do something just because everyone else is doing it. For some people, we may be able to speak up, but other people don't have that kind of courage.
I think that is fascinating, because there are a lot of celebrities who receive criticism from activists because they're not using their platform in a way that the activists deem is their responsibility. So Leila, as someone who speaks to both or all of those universes, give us some insight as to, in April, that was fascinating insight. Give us some insight from what you've heard in your conversations as a journalist from both sides of this issue.
Well, I think that's right, April. There's a lot of people who I think believe like you believe. And then I think you talk to other actors and actresses, well, actors. I don't tend to change the actor because of gender, but other actors or people involved in the arts, and they do feel very strongly that as human beings that live on this planet, as I was saying, that we all, not just if you're an actor, but that we all have a responsibility to not close our eyes to the injustice around us. And that when you become an actor or a social influencer, your platform and your ability to reach people grows exponentially, so that there's even more of an impetus for you to do that. And I've spoken to a lot of people who, like Erica Alexander, some might remember from why am I forgetting right now, but it's this iconic show that everybody loves, and of course she's been in many other things like Get Out, but she said that she was saying that, or a Danny Glover, or people like that. Edward Olmos also was another person who felt that activism was such an important part of who you are, and other people do it quietly. But I understand what you're saying. It's like, well, you don't, if someone doesn't believe it, how do you impose that on them? But I would hope that people understand that when they do have that power, that there is this incredible potential to make a difference in the world and make it better for people, and to utilize that power to do it. And that's how we create the will. Because if we don't do that, the will never be created. It will never happen. And we will know the policies, as Alan said, that work, and we're talking about life and death. We're talking about people dying for lack of health care. We're talking for people dying at the hands of police brutality. And that particularly affects people of color, brown and Black folks. I remember at a conference that I was in, and then I'll stop because I know I'm talking a long time, but it was really interesting to see, African Americans were talking about how police brutalized them in a systemic and systematic way. And there were a couple of, some families who were Latino, and they said, look, they break down our doors 4 a.m. and do a raid, and that brutality exists. And in that particular case, they were talking about, the realities of people who are immigrants here. But it was fascinating to see that coming together. And I think when we realize that we are in an emergency right now, for those of us who don't have comfortable lives and make good salaries, this is an emergency. People are dying. And I feel everybody has a responsibility to raise their voice in whatever way they can.
Alan, I want to go to you as somebody who has been at the crossroads of politics, nonprofit work, policies, activism. You've sort of seen it from so many different angles. Talk to us a little bit about how these huge movements that we have seen recently in the country, like the Black Lives Matter movement, really were so effective in pushing not just policy leaders to push different policies, different legislation, as we have seen. Whether they're successful, right, is still up in the air, but they also pushed what I saw was a breaking point in corporate America to come out and put in place policies on diversity and inclusion and racism and even misogyny on the Me Too movement. Talk to us a little bit about how you see that, both from a historical perspective as well as your perspective having been in all of these arenas.
Well, that's a big question. I feel that the power of an organization like Black Lives Matter and the power of an organization like the Poor People's Campaign, those kind of leading examples of organizations need to be supported in the nonprofit community. We we need to cross endorse one another in
Mhm.
terms of creating a stronger movement that focuses on new will, as we're talking about today. I'm concerned in the case of Black Lives Matter that the focus on police reform has been lost, and that we need to get it back. But frankly, politicians are worried about the police establishment voting against them in 2022 and 2024. In terms of corporate America, there's just been a report, I think it's by the Washington Post, either the Post or the New York Times, about the pledges made by corporate America on all of these issues, and about how in many cases those pledges, those words have not been followed up on with real action. We're having an event later this year with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, in which we're going to put these realities on the table and ask about what they can really do in terms of structural change, not just to paint Black Lives Matter on your commercials, not just to be superficial in support of the National Football League, but to really create change, because that hasn't happened. And I think finally, in terms of how politics and nonprofits interrelate with the Kner Commission, we need to remember, I believe, that this is not just a domestic issue and reality. If we can make progress on Kner and healing priorities, we will increase our soft power with our allies. And Lord knows that we need an increase in soft power these days.
Thank you. I'm going to flip it a little bit to Leila and April, and I'm going to ask, in what ways, in your opinion, have celebrities and influencers perhaps harmed social justice movements? And then how can LULAC members in an organization like LULAC identify harmful social impact practices to help reverse them?
That's a really profound question. And I think we see it so often in the portrayals and the characterizations that we see on television. So for example, if you see criminals, quote unquote, that are brown and Black, then when they talk about who are already dehumanized in American society, Yale has done a lot of investigation into how brown and African American, particularly young people, are seen, men are seen, and they're already criminalized in the minds of many for some reason. Well, and so when you see that reinforced in movies or film or television, and then a bill comes up that says, okay, mandatory minimums, let's lock people away for, a small infraction, a nonviolent drug offense for 20 and 30 years, which has happened. And it becomes accepted by society because that culture and that portrayal that was created by the writers in Hollywood and television, et cetera, have reinforced certain stereotypes that allow for that to happen. When Trump gets up and says, yeah, we got these people crossing the border and they're rapists and they're doing this and doing that, if that gets reinforced by what we see in television, et cetera, and what we hear, then it becomes easier for us to adopt policies that are racist and xenophobic. Yeah, so I think that there is a great harm that has been done and is being done. We're seeing some changes. We're seeing more diversity in terms of the stories that we can tell about ourselves, but it's not where it needs to be. And historically, a lot of those stereotypes have been entrenched in the American landscape in ways that have created very harmful policies and the justification for those policies.
April, same question to you.
I would say reality TV.
Mm,
Reality
good
TV
one.
has done so much damage.
Mm.
When you're not even having celebrities anymore, but you're having regular people who then become celebrities. And they're just playing these characters, or just the violence that you see on TV, where we think that it's okay to see a group of women hitting each other, speaking to each other in such derogatory language. And then we wonder why it trickles down into our schools. And I can prove it to you because I spoke in Chicago on the South Side, and many of my friends were absolutely worried about me going to the South Side of Chicago. And I was like, I grew up during the crack era. I've seen, I've seen some things, and I've witnessed some things. And I remember going in there, and I spoke with one of the facilitators, and I said, "What is your biggest issue in these schools?" She goes, "It's not even the violence amongst the young men, it's the violence amongst the young women."
Oof. Mm.
Wow.
So you have now Black on Black violence
Mhm.
with girls who are the age of 14 to 18 years old. And where do you think that they're getting that from?
Yeah.
Where do you think that that's okay for them to see? And so we begin looking at these shows like a Love and Hip Hop, or where you have housewives of whatever, and it's amplified, and saying, "Oh, that's okay. That's how I can, act because I see it on TV." And we model everything that we see, especially kids.
Yeah.
And especially younger folks who don't have the guidance that they need, for someone to say, "Hey, maybe that's not the way to do it. How can we create solutions? How do we create dynamics where we can have a conversation and not have to shoot one another?" But when she told me about the violence amongst the young women, it broke my heart. It broke my heart because I'm sorry, it gets me emotional.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I was easily could have been that young woman.
you
I could have
saw
easily,
yourself in that.
exactly. I saw myself, and I thought, wow, no one really is giving them a chance, because they themselves don't have a chance to make it out from here. Not only are they being, manipulated by what's going on in the media, but also social media.
Right.
I mean, you can see violence in your bedroom, on the toilet. It doesn't matter. So those are the things that, when I think about how celebrity has gone the wrong way, I think in those terms.
Yeah. In what ways have celebrities and influencers harmed social justice movements, and how can LULAC members identify harmful social impact practices? I know this is something that I've asked everyone. Let's go to Dolores.
Well, at this point in time that we are at in our society, those voices are needed more than ever. Because we know that we're at a very critical time in the United States of America. The census had just come out and said that Latinos are now the largest minority majority in the United States of America. In places like where I am at in the Central Valley of California, Latinos are not the major minority. They are the major population in the Central Valley of California. So that means that we as Latinos now have a lot more influence, but we also at the same time, we have more responsibilities. And so if we can get our celebrity friends to encourage people to become citizens, to become engaged, to register to vote, and to be engaged and informing themselves of what is going on politically. So we now have that huge responsibility to make our influence felt. And in that case, it's not just celebrities. I think it's every single Latino. Here in California, we know that Latinos are going to be the determinant factor for Gavin Newsom, our governor, who the Republicans are now trying to recall, trying to overturn the election where he was duly elected as governor of California. So we now, the Latinos are the influencers, you might say.
I think another example of that, I think, is if you look at all of the cop shows that have been around forever, whether it's Law and Order or you name it, and police brutality is an integral part of how police behave on those shows, and you identify with the police because they're the good guys in these shows, right? And
Right.
they're getting rid of bad people. And so what happens is it becomes normalized, police brutality, violation of civil rights, etc. In a lot of those shows becomes normalized for people. And so I think that's another example of kind of what you're talking about, April, of how television creates a certain amount of behavior or acceptance of a certain amount of behavior.
Correct.
April's words and feelings on the South Side of Chicago really makes me think about all the colleagues that I have in the South Side of Chicago when we were implementing our mentoring programs for middle school and high school youth. Those programs, intense mentoring and tutoring after school, are needed so much more now because those kids are now 2 years behind. And this huge education issue is going to make the violence issue much worse.
Yeah, that is definitely true. Let's go to a more positive, funner question. Who are some of your favorite celebrities and influencers, not in current company, April, that support Latinx causes and movements? I'll go with you first, Lila.
Oh, I mean, there's so many. Bobby Cannavale's been doing a lot of great stuff, not always in front of the camera, but I really love what he's been doing. Wilma Valderrama also. I love me some Cardi B, and I think she has incredible influence. I know it's a mixed bag with Cardi because she has so much negative influence in some ways, but politically, she really is on point. And I think Amada is actually kind of a positive role model in many ways, not in the way that we would think, but for the young people who follow her, she tends not to get into the drama, and she speaks a lot about immigrant rights. Her mother crossed the border here and worked. She talks a lot about that. They were homeless. They did everything they could do in order to create a life for themselves in the United States. And her mother is like a shero, and she upholds her. So I know it's a mixed bag because they are part of those reality shows that you're talking about, but at least I believe in the context of those reality shows, they're offering some positive messages. And
what
Cardi,
about you,
of course,
April?
no longer. Yeah.
I would definitely have to say Lin Manuel. I think he's tapped into something, some type of brilliance. He really he has the finger of what's going on and saying, how can we show this on film? How can we use our voices? He's someone who I really admire and I look up to. And I just dig everything that he's doing. And people who are not just on the main light, as I like to call it, but people like, Lemon Anderson, I'm sorry, La Bruja Caridad. She's a poet, and she has always been, using her voice forever in any kind of thing, speaking of Puerto Rico, speaking of women's rights. So those are the people who I look up to, who I'm saying, wow, they are really in there doing the work that they don't always get the flowers that they deserve.
The credit.
And so it's people, Lemon, he's profound. He works with Spike Lee, just always using his celebrity in powerful ways. And it's one of those, when you get to see it on that level, you go, yeah, this is what it's about. It really is profound to see that.
Dolores, what are some of your favorite celebrities and influencers that you've worked with before that you are seeing are having a big impact that support Latinx causes and movements?
Well, when we think of the Latino community, we have Rita Moreno, who is not only a famous celebrity, but also has always stood up and used her voice for our progressive community. We have George Lopez, who is also a really good friend and has done a lot. I was just recently with George in August the 3rd when they dedicated the memorial for the 23 Mexican Americans and Mexicans that were killed at the Walmart. And so we have people like that. And of course, our political leaders are also very important. Raul Grijalva from Arizona, the congressman from Arizona, who was always a very big progressive voice, especially when it comes to issues like climate change. So of course, I'm mentioning the Latino celebrities that we have in our midst, and of course, all of the musical groups like Ozomatli, who was always carrying a very progressive message out there, Los Lobos, and of course, other comedians like Gabriel Iglesias and John Leguizamo. John Leguizamo was very effective in terms of the last election of getting people in Florida and every place else to come out to vote. In getting people out to vote, and that is America Ferrara and Eva Longoria, who have been at the forefront. And we were so thrilled and happy to see that Eva Longoria was the MC at the inauguration of President Biden. I think that was really, really a big compliment to our community to have someone like her be our representative at the inaugural.
And I'm going to do one last question to each of you that focuses on how advocacy organizations like LULAC, both at the national level as well as the local level, because they have councils in every state, how can they collaborate with celebrities and influencers in order to reach a greater audience and help create the new will needed to implement the policies advocated in the Kner Commission so that we can create the change we need? Let's start with you, Alan.
That's the big question. And I've really learned a lot from today. But I hope that today is not just 60 minutes that is then lost. I also know that Cindy has a big priority on how Latino advocacy organizations, African American advocacy organizations, and American Indian advocacy organizations need to better work together. That's why I'm thinking that our Smithsonian event later could be a springboard.
Right.
I just get back to my challenges. We can't just have this talk and admire people all over the place who are doing good work, but we have to come together. And maybe the Smithsonian event can lead to a White House conference on New Will that has a great deal of diversity. But we have to move forward and understand that without that, there'll be a 75-year later Kner report and 100-year later Kner report without any progress, and that just won't work.
Leela, to you.
And you know what? Before I answer that, I just have to shout out, I don't know how I forgot them, Eva Longoria and Rosario Dawson.
Oh, yes.
They are so in
Agreed.
the trenches, right? Everybody, they are amazing. And they have been on the forefront of voting rights and immigrant rights and civil rights and justice for a long time. They're heroes of mine. I love both Eva and Rosario. They've been doing great work. So I wanted to shout them out. And they're consistent. So you don't have the contradiction of like an Amara La Negra, right? So anyway, I think, I'll give two quick examples. I'm an old girl, so I was very much involved in the anti-apartheid movement. And one of the things that really helped lead to the sanctions against South Africa, which led to the toppling of that apartheid regime, was the involvement of artists and activists. And in fact, they would come out and march in front of the embassy. They would raise their voices. They would call for the boycotts and the sanctions, put a lot of pressure on the then Reagan administration, who of course was against that, and others, to finally put sanctions on South Africa. And I think that made a significant difference in both Nelson Mandela being freed and apartheid, at least legal apartheid, ending. Unfortunately, there's still economic apartheid in many ways there, but legal apartheid ending. The second one, I was very much involved with Randall Robinson's Trans-Africa. At the time, we were trying to support the Haitian people who had voted in a president that was not so popular here in the United States. And he was overthrown and was living in exile. And there have been demonstrations and marches, and everybody was out there saying, you know, you may not like President Aristide, that was his name, he was a Catholic priest, but that's who the Haitian people elected. And it was after decades and decades of a brutal dictatorship that was supported by the CIA, the Duvalier, Papa Doc, and Baby Doc. So anyway, long story short, a lot of work trying to get him restored. And the Clinton administration at the time said, look, we can't really touch this guy, and he needs to go back and find a compromise with the kind of brutal representation of the former dictatorship there in order to govern. So what tipped the scales on that was artists. There was a man named Jonathan Demme who produced and directed Silence of the Lambs, Married to the Mob. He loved Haiti, and he got Robert De Niro, Eva Longoria was a part of that, Julia Roberts, Gregory Peck, like all this cohort of artists who raised their voice on this issue and pressured the Clinton administration. Randall Robinson, the head of Trans-Africa, did a hunger strike, but the artists raised their voice. They did an open letter in a Washington Post, New York Times. Long story short, the Clinton administration completely reversed its policy and militarily supported the restoration of democracy in Haiti by restoring Aristide. And afterwards, Sandy Berger, who was working with the Department of State at the time, came to us and said, you know, thank you so much for giving us the political cover to be able to implement that policy. So I say that to say that I think developing a very organized entity that specifically involves artists, athletes, et cetera, social influencers, in a very strategic way is a very important thing for organizations to do. And in this particular case, what Jonathan Demme did was he was the one who did the outreach to the artists, but we created a thing that was Artists for Democracy in Haiti, and they were able to be a part of that. So they didn't just necessarily have to be a part of it individually, but we looked at collectively, how can you raise your voice as artists and actually make a difference? So I really recommend that organizations do that kind of outreach to the artistic community, because they can be so strategic in bringing the spotlight to an issue in a way that in this particular case, in actually 27 days, changed policy, dramatically created a reversal in policy.
Right. Thank you. That is very eye-opening. I remember a lot of that. April, what about you?
I always say, when you want to know what's going on in the world, tap into artists and the youth. They know everything way before it even happens. They have the temperature, they have the gauge of this is happening, this is what's going on. And when you give them the platform, and I truly understand that we get excited when we have celebrities, because we assume that it always drives and brings people closer, right? It gets people excited. But when you get to tap into the minds of the youth and the artists who are really seeing things that celebrities don't get to see, right? We get to do the groundwork. When you have organizations really backing up what they say, you know, walking the walk and talking the talk, and empowering these people to move forward and giving them the tools that they need, whatever that may look like, my goodness, that is when a true revolution happens. And it gets me so excited when I see the youth, speaking up and being so passionate about whatever it is these days, because, we grew up in a time where most teenagers didn't even care, about the earth, or now you have kids who are so aware of Mother Earth and what's going on. Can we just imagine if we empower them? They are the movers and shakers. They are the leaders. They are the ones who are the agents of change. And so when I think of a LULAC, that's what gets me excited. And that's what I hope to see, that they would reach out to not just celebrities or people, but people who are really on the ground. And, Mr. Curtis, I would love to just continue this conversation and figure out how we can get back to the South Side of Chicago. But also, it was Erica Alexander is a very, very good dear friend of mine. She does profound work, and the show was Living Single. I was trying to find and Living Single. I had to Google it. I was like, wait a minute, what was my girl
Living
on?
Single, that's
but
right.
Erica, she does profound work. Her activism, speaking up for women and voters' rights, which is key. And one of the most profound things, I was in the film Freedom Riders starring Hilary Swank, and it was all about elevating the voices of youth. When we think of an Anne Frank, who, she was an addict, and all she had were her words. Mm-hmm. And her book has, I think, sold millions of the copies and translated so many times. And I tell the youth all the time, your voice matters. So having a LULAC amplify the youth is something that I would love to see.
And you mentioned, April, how important it was to work with people on the ground. So that's a great segue for our friend Dolores Huerta to answer that question too. So Dolores, what do you think?
Well, I think we as organizations have a duty to reach out to celebrities, because oftentimes they may not know the issues that we're working on. One of the issues that I've been working on is death with dignity. And this is a really important measure that allows people who are going to die because they are in illnesses that are terminal, that there's no cure for them, they're having a lot of pain, and that they are able to actually to have doctors assist them to end their life peacefully and without pain, and to be able to gather their family, friends, and friends around them. And so some of these issues may seem controversial. At the time, I'm thinking also of women's reproductive rights, women's right to choose, women's right to abortion. It's at some point they seem controversial, but later on they become the normal. And when we can have celebrities speak out on some of these issues, it's very, very important. And I know that these are some of the big issues that we have in our Latino community, because we have so many of our members that are Catholic or evangelical. And but I think that we have to not be afraid to speak out, and then get our celebrity friends to help us carry out our message. The issues on the Equal Rights Amendment, so that women's can finally have the equal rights to be in the Constitution of the United States of America. Right now, a lot of women think, oh, we thought we had equal rights to men. No, we don't, but it's got to be put into the Constitution. And this is a measure that is right now being discussed in this US Senate right now, but it's going to be very difficult to get the approval for the Equal Rights Amendment, for immigrants' rights, for the PRO Act, for labor unions. It's going to be very difficult to get those rights unless we can get rid of the filibuster or amend the filibuster, so it will be able to bring these important measures to the floor and get voted on.
And Dolores, I want your thoughts on this now. The impact that celebrities and influencers can have on social impact organizations like LULAC, like the Dolores Huerta Foundation, and the movements surrounding the issues that they uplift. How can they advance the policies to reduce racial and economic inequality through their power?
Well, when we look at some of the celebrities, I can give a couple of examples. Like Harry Belafonte was very instrumental in working with Coretta Scott King to get the Martin Luther Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. holiday in the United States of America. Stevie Wonder was also very effective in making that happen. In terms of the farm worker movement, celebrities like Martin Sheen, Jane Fonda, and many others, Ed Asner were very supportive of the United Farm Workers, and Gloria Steinem, who helped spread the word about the Great Boycott during those very, very important years of when the farm workers movement was being formed. And so we know that when celebrities speak out, they get a lot of media attention and people really listen to them. So it's very important, I think, for celebrities to understand that this is part of the work that they have to do.
And Dolores, now to you. Why is it important for celebrities and influencers to distance themselves from a historical precedent of classism, sensationalism, and materialism to aid underrepresented groups in their social justice efforts to create the will called for in the Kner Commission?
Well, again, using their platforms that they have, celebrities can correct history, or they can inform people about the history that has been ignored. I always like to say to people when I speak, Google a map of the United States of America before 1848, but you will find that a third of the United States was Mexico. And so that means that the Mexicans were here before the United States of America was the United States of America. And when celebrities can use their voice to challenge racism and make people understand that the indigenous people of the continents, North America and South America, were here before the United States was the United States. These are important lessons for people to learn so that we can combat the racism that exists against Latinos, but especially Mexicans and people of color. No, I think the only thing I want to share with LULAC, and I know LULAC has been around a long time, is that all of us have to step up our game. The same thing goes with our foundation, the Dolores Huerta Foundation. We are working on vaccine clinics and food banks and doing door to door to get out the vote and register people to vote and doing the citizenship classes, et cetera. And like LULAC with your wonderful youth group that you've had for so many years, we are actually have a major youth organization also within the Dolores Huerta Foundation. So all of us, we just have to get together and do more work and work with our allies and our friends, because as I said before, this is a critical time that we have in our nation, and we've got to really stand up and take a lot of progressive action to make things better for our community. Si se puede with LULAC. To learn more about the Dolores Huerta Foundation and the work that we're doing in our grassroots community organizing, please go to doloreshuerta.org. Thank you.
That was a fabulous discussion. We could go on for hours on this topic, but I really, really want to thank our panelists, Alan and Leila and April and Dolores. You all have been amazing. You have tremendous impact yourselves on everything that you're doing. So I am so proud to have been able to share this time with you to gain your insights for the audience. I want to thank LULAC for always putting these issues that sometimes are not easy to even discuss and to really delve into, but that's what it takes. If we don't talk about these things, we're never going to solve them. So I really want to thank LULAC for putting together not just the annual summit, but very particular important panels such as this one to be able to discuss the solutions and what we're going to need to get there together as a country. So muchísimas gracias, panelists. Muchísimas gracias, LULAC. Muchísimas gracias, audience members and amigos who have joined us. Buenas tardes.